"Don't look at me," she whispered, bruised and barefoot, until the rancher laid down his gun. She walked down the lonely, dusty road, her bare feet making soft thuds on the hard ground with every step. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its hot, unforgiving light on the open land around her. Each step she took hurt, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything. Her body was covered in bruises, the evidence of a life she had tried to escape. She had been running for days, her body exhausted and hungry, but her spirit still refused to give up. She needed to keep going. Her mind kept flashing back to what she had left behind. The house, the man, the fear. For years, she had been trapped in a world where every moment was controlled by him. Every word she spoke, every movement she made, was watched. He had always been so kind at first, his soft words and gentle touch making her feel like the luckiest woman alive. But as time passed, things changed. The love that had once been warm and kind became cold, angry and controlling. The gentle touch turned into harsh slaps, the kind words into sharp, cutting insults. She had tried to leave once, but he found her and brought her back. He told her she would never escape, that she was nothing without him. And for a while, she believed it. But not anymore, Bess. Today she had broken free. Today she had taken the first real step toward freedom, and there was no turning back. Breath. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay there. Not with him. Not in that house. Not in that life. Her feet were sore, her legs aching with each step. Desk. She was tired. So tired. Brace. She kept moving, the path in front of her stretching unendlessly. That's when she saw him. The rancher. At first, she didn't notice him. She had been too focused on the ground beneath her, trying to block out the pain in her body and the fear that still gripped her heart. But then she heard the sound of hooves on the dirt road, the soft clip-clop of a horse coming closer. Burst. She looked up startled, and saw him. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, riding a horse down the road toward her. His face was weathered, his clothes dusty from the long day's work, but there was something about him that made her pause. His eyes were kind.
And when they met hers, something inside her shifted.
Bow.
Despair! She wanted to look away, to keep walking, to keep running, but she couldn't.
The man slowed his horse, pulling it to a stop just a few feet from her. He didn't speak at first, just sat there watching her. His eyes filled with concern. She couldn't bring herself to speak either. She just stood there, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to say. Her heart raced, and she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest.
He was a stranger, a man she had never met, and yet something in his presence made her feel both safe and terrified.
Just bad was.
There was something. A tell-of-an. I haven't bought him.
"Are you all right?" he asked finally, his voice low and steady. She flinched at the sound of his voice as though she had been caught doing something wrong.
She hadn't expected him to speak. She hadn't expected him to stop. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. Bet. She just shook her head, not daring to meet his gaze.
She couldn't.
Desperation. Not with everything that had happened. Not with everything she had been through. Bruised, broken, barefoot. "Don't look at me," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Her voice trembled, and for a moment she felt the urge to run again. To keep moving. To keep running until she was far, far away from here. But she couldn't. She was too tired, too broken. And even though she wanted to keep going, to keep hiding, something kept her rooted to the spot. The rancher didn't move. He didn't press her for answers, didn't ask why she was barefoot or why she looked so afraid. Instead, he just sat there, looking at her with those soft, kind eyes. He had seen pain before. He had seen loss, and he knew what it looked like. This woman, this stranger, was running from something, and he couldn't just ride on past her, not when she needed help. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice calm. "I just want to help." She felt a pang of uncertainty in her chest. Could she trust him? Was he just like the others? Or was he different? She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. All she knew was that she couldn't keep going like this. Breaths. She couldn't keep running. She needed help, and this man, he seemed to want to give it to her. After a long moment of silence, the rancher dismounted his horse and walked slowly toward her. She flinched again, but he didn't seem to notice. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough for her to feel his presence, but far enough not to crowd her. "I've got a ranch not too far from here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You can come with me." "Get some rest. Have something to eat. You don't have to be alone." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know anything about him. But she was so tired, so hungry, and the thought of staying out here alone on the road, it terrified her.
"Aye!" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. She didn't know what to say.
The rancher seemed to sense her hesitation, and without a word he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He unscrewed the lid and offered it to her. "Here. Drink. You've been walking a long way." "Shh. She took it from him slowly, her hands shaking as she raised it to her lips. The cool water felt like heaven as it slid down her throat, quenching her thirst and soothing the ache inside her. When she finished, she handed the canteen back to him. He didn't take it right away. Instead, he studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide something. Breath. Then, without another word, he placed the canteen back into his bag and turned back toward his horse. "I'll be here if you need me," he said softly.
"No pressure! But if you're ready, I'll take you to my ranch."
"You don't have to be alone anymore."
She stood there for a long time watching him. She didn't know what to do.
She didn't know if she could trust him. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her that made her think maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. With a final glance at the rancher, she finally made her decision.
"I'll come with you,"
she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, she took a step forward, away from the road, and into the unknown. She followed him in silence, the rancher's steady footsteps echoing in the dusty path ahead of her. Her feet, sore from miles of walking, dragged with every step. But she didn't stop. Not now. Not after he had offered her help. After he had shown her a kindness that felt foreign, like a dream she wasn't sure she deserved. The rancher didn't rush her breath. He walked slowly, giving her the space she needed but staying close enough to make her feel safe. She had never known a man like him. A man who didn't expect something in return for every act of kindness. Jay asks him in a Dak she wasn't used to this. His gentleness, his quiet strength. It made her feel both grateful and uncertain. Her past had taught her that people, especially men, didn't offer help without some kind of price. But with him, there was no pressure. No hidden motives. Just the promise of a warm meal and a safe place to rest. The rancher led her to a small but sturdy house nestled at the edge of the land. It was modest but well kept, with smoke rising from a chimney and a few horses grazing nearby. It didn't look like much, but it felt like the start of something new. She had been on the road for so long, her life defined by one escape after another, never knowing where she would end up. But now, she was here with him. When they reached the door, the rancher turned to her. His eyes were kind, his expression open. He gave her a small nod, as if asking if she was ready. She didn't say anything, but something in her chest eased. She nodded back, and he pushed open the door, stepping aside to let her in. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of wood and food cooking. The simple furnishings, a wooden table, a few chairs, a stone fireplace, gave the place a homely feel, unlike anything she had known before. She hesitated at the threshold, unsure of what to do next. But the rancher didn't push her. He simply walked over to the stove, where a pot of stew simmered, filling the room with a rich, savory smell. "You can sit down if you'd like," he said, his voice as calm as always. "I'll get you something to eat."
Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her of how hungry she was, how long it had been since she had last eaten anything.
She moved slowly, her eyes still darting around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The rancher was cooking, his back to her as he stirred the stew. Break. For a moment she allowed herself to relax, just a little. She took a seat at the table, her body grateful for the chance to rest. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came with knowing two people had no expectations of each other. No demands. She wasn't used to it, but it felt almost peaceful. She watched the rancher, his broad shoulders moving easily as he worked. There was something soothing about the way he moved, the way he handled everything with care. He wasn't in a rush, not like the men she had known in the past.
It was as if time didn't matter here, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to take a breath and let go of the constant worry that had gripped her for so long.
When the rancher turned around, he was holding a bowl of stew in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. He set them down in front of her, a soft smile on his face.
"Eat. It's not much, but it'll keep you going." She looked at the food, her stomach growling louder.
She hadn't realized just how hungry she was until now. She picked up the spoon, hesitant at first, but when the first bite of the warm, hearty stew hit her tongue, she couldn't help but close her eyes and savor it. It wasn't the finest meal she had ever had, but in that moment it felt like a feast. She ate slowly, not saying a word, but the rancher didn't seem to mind. Round, he sat across from her, waiting patiently. When she finished, she looked up, surprised to see that he hadn't moved, hadn't eaten himself. He was simply watching her, his gaze kind but not intrusive. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The rancher nodded, his expression softening. "You're welcome." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Breath. The silence was comfortable. The only sound, the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Then, finally, the rancher broke the quiet. "Breaths. Do you want to tell me what happened?" His voice was gentle, not demanding.
You don't have to.
"But if you want to talk about it, I'm here." She froze. The question hung in the air, and she felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected him to ask. Breaths. She hadn't expected him to want to know. For so long she had kept everything bottled up, locked away in a place where no one could reach it.
But here, in this small house, with the warmth of the fire and the gentleness of the rancher's presence, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could share her burden with someone.
But the words didn't come easily. She wasn't ready to say it aloud. Not yet.
She wasn't sure if she ever would be, but she shook her head, her eyes falling to the table in front of her.
"I can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. The rancher didn't press her. He simply nodded, understanding.
He wasn't upset, wasn't disappointed.
He just gave her the space she needed, no questions asked.
"All right," he said softly.
"Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." Breath.
She looked up at him then, and for the first time in a long time she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was the kindness he had shown her, the way he didn't ask for anything in return.
Maybe it was the safety she felt here, in his home, with no one to hurt her, no one to control her. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever find the strength to fully trust again, to open up about the past that still haunted her. But in this moment, with the rancher sitting across from her, she realized something important. For the first time in so long, she didn't have to be afraid. Days passed quietly at the ranch. The sun rose each morning and set each night, marking the steady rhythm of life. She spent her days helping around the ranch, doing simple tasks that kept her mind occupied. At first it was difficult. Her hands were soft, unused to work, but the rancher patiently showed her how to care for the animals, how to feed the horses, how to mend the fences. Breaths. Every task was a new lesson, and slowly she began to feel useful again. The simple work helped her forget the darkness of the past, if only for a little while. Grasp. Every evening after the work was done, they would sit on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The rancher never pressured her to talk, never asked about the life she had left behind. He simply sat with her, sharing the quiet, as if he knew that sometimes silence was all someone needed to heal. She found comfort in the routine.
It was the first time in years that she didn't have to constantly look over her shoulder, wondering when the next blow would come. The rancher didn't raise his voice, didn't demand anything from her.
There was no fear in his presence. It was the safety she had longed for, but had never truly known. But despite the peace she found in the rancher's company, there were still moments when the past would rise up in her mind like an unwanted shadow. The memories would come, sharp and painful, and she would freeze, as if waiting for the pain to pass. Sometimes she would close her eyes and see him. The man who had controlled her, who had twisted her love into something dark. The man who had taken everything from her. But then she would look at the rancher, and the warmth of his kindness would push the shadows away, at least for a little while. One afternoon she was walking near the barn, her hands full of hay, when she saw him. The rancher. He was sitting on a log outside cleaning his boots. Preparation. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes softened, as if he could see the thoughts playing behind her gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady, as always. She stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to answer. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to burden him with her past either. Brent. She shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the hay in her hands.
"I'm fine," she said quietly, but her voice wavered just a little.
Breath. The rancher stood up and walked over to her. He didn't seem convinced by her answer, but he didn't press her. Instead, he took the hay from her hands and gently placed it in the corner of the barn.
"I know you're trying," he said, his voice quiet but firm.
"But you don't have to pretend to be fine all the time. You don't have to keep everything inside." She looked up at him, her chest tightening. The weight of the past felt heavier in that moment, as if it had followed her here, and now it was pressing down on her, demanding to be acknowledged. I don't want to talk about it, she whispered, her eyes welling up with tears she had tried so hard to hold back. The rancher nodded, his expression soft and understanding. You don't have to, he said gently. But when you're ready, I'll be here.
She swallowed hard, turning away to hide the tears that were threatening to fall. She didn't know if she would ever be ready.
The idea of opening up about the pain she had suffered felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. She had spent so long running, hiding from the truth, that it seemed impossible to face it now. But something in the rancher's words gave her a sliver of hope. Maybe one day she would be ready. Maybe one day she would be able to let go of the fear that had gripped her for so long. But not today, per se. Today she was still holding on. As the weeks passed, the rancher continued to offer her kindness, even when she didn't ask for it. He didn't try to force her to talk, didn't demand anything from her. He simply let her be. And for that she was grateful. But one day, as she worked outside near the barn, she heard something that made her freeze in place. It was the sound of a car engine, distant but unmistakable. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw it. A car moving slowly down the dirt road toward the ranch. It was him. The man from her past. The man who had tried to control her, who had threatened her life every day they had spent together. She didn't know how he had found her, but she knew that if he was here, everything she had worked so hard for would be gone in an instant. Her body froze in terror. The fear she had spent so long pushing down suddenly rushed to the surface. She turned quickly, looking for a place to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The rancher was in the barn, and she knew he wouldn't understand if she ran. He wouldn't understand why she couldn't face him. She couldn't stay and explain. But she couldn't stay. She couldn't face him. Not now. The memories of the past were too fresh, too painful. As the car drew closer, she felt her chest tighten with panic. She needed to run. She needed to escape, but she couldn't do it again.
She couldn't keep running. Not this time.
Just as she turned to flee, she heard a voice. It was calm, steady, and unwavering. The rancher's voice. "Hey!" he called, his voice firm but kind. "What's wrong?" She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say.
She couldn't explain. It's him, she said, her voice shaking.
He's come for me. He's found me. The rancher looked toward the road, where the car was now stopping in front of the ranch. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he walked toward her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Breath. His touch was reassuring, strong, and yet gentle. "Don't worry," he said, his voice steady. "I won't let him hurt you." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't sure if she could stay. But when she saw the look in his eyes, trusting, calm, and unwavering, something inside her began to shift. "I'm not going anywhere," the rancher said firmly. "You're safe here." "I promise." For the first time in a long time, she believed him. The rancher walked toward the man in the car, his steps sure and confident. She stayed behind, watching. her heart still racing.
But there was something different now. She wasn't alone. The rancher had made it clear that he wasn't going to let anyone hurt her.
Not anymore. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could face whatever came her way. She was ready to stand her ground, and with the rancher by her side, she knew she didn't have to face it alone. The rancher's footsteps were steady as he walked toward the car that had come to a stop near the fence. The engine idled, a sound that made her heart race even faster. She stood frozen, not sure whether she should stay or run. Her body was telling her to flee, but her mind told her something different. She couldn't keep running. Not anymore. She had come too far. The rancher had given her a chance at something better, something safe.
And if she left now, everything she had built here would crumble. The man in the car had found her.
Narration. He had tracked her down just like she had always feared. She had been running from him for so long, but now there was no escaping the past. But she couldn't let it control her anymore.
Not with the rancher here.
Not with the safety he had given her. She watched the rancher approach the car, his broad shoulders blocking the sunlight. She could see him speaking to the man in the car, his words calm, measured, but firm. He was trying to keep the situation under control, trying to protect her without making things worse. Her eyes darted between the rancher and the man in the car. Unable to look away, she couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. She could see it in the rancher's body language, in the way he held himself. He was in control. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't have to fight this battle alone. The car engine cut off, and the man inside stepped out. Breaths she didn't recognize him at first, but as soon as he stepped into the sunlight, she saw the familiar face. His features had hardened over the years, his eyes darker, filled with something dangerous. He had always been like that, charming when he needed to be, cruel when he didn't get his way. He was the kind of man who used fear to control people, and she had been one of his many victims. The man took a few steps toward the rancher, but he didn't come any closer. The rancher stood tall, unmoving, his eyes locked on the man in front of him. For a moment, everything felt still, like the world had paused, just to watch what would happen next. Break. "I think you've come to the wrong place," the rancher said, his voice steady but laced with authority.
"She's not going anywhere with you." The man laughed, a bitter sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up.
"You don't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's mine." Breaths. "She always will be. You can't keep her here. She'll come with me or things will get ugly." The rancher didn't flinch. He didn't take a step back or even raise his voice. He stood there, his posture strong, as if the man in front of him didn't even matter. "You can try to take her," the rancher said, his voice quiet. "But you'll have to go through me first, and I don't think you want to do that." The man's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He sized the rancher up, his gaze calculating. He was trying to figure out if the rancher was serious, if he could back up his words. The rancher didn't move, didn't show any fear. He just stared the man down, his eyes unflinching. She felt something shift inside her. For so long she had lived in fear, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when the next threat would come. But now, with the rancher standing between her and the man from her past, she realized that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. She wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. The man in front of her, the man who had once controlled her every move, who had made her feel small and worthless,
was standing there facing a man who wasn't afraid of him. The rancher wasn't going to back down.
He wasn't going to let her go. For the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten.
It wasn't just the rancher's words that gave her strength. It was the fact that he was standing up for her. He was offering her something she had never had before. Freedom. Freedom from the man who had hurt her. Freedom from the life that had kept her trapped in fear. The silence between the two men stretched on, and the tension was thick, like the air just before a storm. The man from her past looked the rancher up and down, his eyes narrowing.
"I don't need to explain myself to you," the man spat, his voice dripping with disdain.
She'll come with me, whether you like it or not. She doesn't belong here.
Perhaps.
The rancher didn't answer. He didn't need to.
His presence alone was enough to make the man pause, to make him realize that this wasn't going to be an easy fight.
"I told you," the rancher said, his voice still calm but firm.
She's not going anywhere, and if you try to make her, you'll regret it." The man's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and uncertainty.
He had always been used to getting what he wanted, always relied on intimidation to make people bend to his will. But the rancher wasn't afraid.
Perhaps. And that was something the man didn't know how to handle.
After a long pause, the man let out a frustrated growl and turned away, climbing back into the car.
"This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, slamming the door behind him. The rancher didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched as the car drove off, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Only then did he turn to face her, his expression softening. "He won't be back," the rancher said quietly, though there was a firmness in his voice that gave her no doubt.
"Not as long as I'm here."
The fear that had gripped her since the moment she saw the car was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. But the rancher's words, his presence, had done something she hadn't thought was possible. They had given her hope. The rancher looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You're safe now." I won't let him hurt you." She nodded, her chest tight with emotions she wasn't sure how to express. She wasn't sure if she could ever truly feel free, truly let go of the fear that had been a part of her for so long. But in that moment, with the rancher standing beside her, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe it. She could start to believe that she was worth protecting. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a future. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't alone. And that was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The days that followed the confrontation with the man from her past were quieter, but they held a different kind of weight. She found herself walking through the ranch with a new sense of freedom, though she still felt the shadow of fear lurking in the corners of her mind. The rancher had been right. He had kept his promise. The man hadn't returned. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that at any moment he could show up again, trying to take back what he thought was his. But each time she looked at the rancher, each time she saw the calm certainty in his eyes, something in her heart began to change. He had shown her something she had never known before: trust. And though she didn't feel completely healed, she felt safer, more hopeful than she ever had. Best. She knew, deep down, that he would protect her. He had proven that. Her days had settled into a new rhythm. The mornings were spent doing chores around the ranch. But she fed the animals, cleaned the stables, and helped with whatever else needed doing. The rancher would always be nearby, offering quiet guidance, never rushing her, but always there to lend a hand when needed. She was still learning, still getting used to the work, but she felt a growing sense of pride in the progress she was making.
For the first time in so long, she felt like she was in control of her life again, like she was capable of more than just surviving. The evenings were the best part. The rancher would finish his work, and they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that made her heart feel lighter. They rarely spoke during these moments, and yet the silence was never uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt like peace, like two people sharing a space without needing to fill it with words. For a long time, she had been afraid of silence, afraid of what it might bring. But with him, it felt safe.
It felt like healing. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples, she found herself sitting next to the rancher, her legs crossed beneath her.
He was sitting just a little distance away, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as it often was. She watched him for a moment, taking in the quiet strength he exuded.
He had never asked her to speak about her past, never pressed her for details. He had simply given her space, letting her come to him when she was ready.
I never thought I'd feel like this again, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hadn't meant to speak, but the words came out before she could stop them. The rancher turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. There was no surprise in his gaze, no judgment, just understanding.
Like what?
He asked, his voice soft.
She hesitated, unsure of how to explain it.
There was so much she hadn't said, so much she had kept buried for so long. But tonight, for some reason, it felt easier to speak.
Like I'm
safe, she said slowly, as though the word itself might slip away from her if she wasn't careful. Like I'm not just hiding anymore. Like I can finally breathe. The rancher didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. His gaze never wavered from hers, as if he were waiting for her to continue, but he never pushed.
It's strange, she continued, her voice gaining strength. For so long I thought I had to keep running.
I thought I had to keep looking over my shoulder, never trusting anyone. I thought I had to do everything alone.
Breath. She paused, taking in a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words.
But I don't feel like that anymore.
The rancher's smile grew just a little, and he leaned back against the porch railing, his arms crossed.
I'm glad to hear that, he said quietly.
You don't have to do everything alone. Not anymore. For the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, she felt like she was finally letting go of the past, the fear, the constant vigilance. It was still there, deep inside her, but now it didn't control her. Now, with the rancher by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next without running, without hiding. I don't know how to explain it, she said, her voice catching slightly. But being here with you, it's the first time I've ever felt like I could truly be myself, like I don't have to pretend. I don't have to hide. The rancher's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. You don't have to pretend with me. Not now, not ever. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long seemed to lift just a little more with those words. She still didn't know if she could ever fully let go of the fear that had been part of her life for so many years. But here, in this moment, she felt the first real peace she had felt in a long time. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the world in soft, golden light. They sat together in silence, watching the day fade into night, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a future for her here. Maybe there was a life she could build, not just for survival, but for living. The days that followed were quieter, but they were good. She continued her work around the ranch, but now there was a new sense of purpose behind it. The rancher was always there, guiding her, teaching her, but never pushing her too hard.
She was learning how to live again, how to trust, and how to let herself feel safe. One evening, as they sat together on the porch once more, the rancher looked over at her, his gaze thoughtful. "You're doing good work around here," he said with a small nod. "I'm proud of you." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Grace. She had never thought of herself as someone to be proud of. For so long she had felt like nothing more than a shadow of the person she could have been. But now, here, with him, she felt like she was beginning to find herself again. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion she couldn't quite put into words. The rancher smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me. You're doing this for yourself, not for me." She nodded, understanding what he meant. She was doing this for herself. She was learning how to live again, how to trust again, and, perhaps most importantly, how to believe that she deserved a life of peace, of safety, of freedom. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. And with each passing day she grew stronger. She grew more sure of herself, more certain of the life she was building with the rancher. But she knew there would still be difficult moments, still be shadows from the past that would rise up from time to time. But she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. Breaths, and that made all the difference. With the rancher's steady presence, his kindness, and his unwavering support, she finally began to believe in a future. A future where she could be free, where she could be herself, and where the past wouldn't hold her captive anymore.